With its relentless pace of growth and exponential rise in numeric strength, Delhi continues to accommodate people from all parts of the country. Its success in amalgamating the relics of past with the aspirations of future soaring higher each passing day, its ability to provide a decent standard of living to its citizens plunges lower and lower. The air quality of Delhi in particular remains poor throughout the year, deteriorating further to hazardous levels during winters. That is the time when every citizen glues his attention to the factors behind the ecological mayhem. However, amidst the media cacophony and political blame game, the real issue gets lost each time. Just like the voice of sanity grapples to find a space, the city holds up in its struggle to breathe. 1984, the night of 2nd December, Bhopal faces a devastating industrial disaster, infamously known as Bhopal gas tragedy, which resulted in deaths of thousands of civilians.
Notice what that when 1984 happened, and this was a massive incident, which was essentially a result of negligence and not enough protocols of safety being kept or not enough information being put out in the public domain by the concerned company in question. There was a major lacuna with respect to what law could the culprits be punished under. For those of the audience who don't know, the maximum punishable sentence that these people secured was essentially just 2 years at the end of the case. Whereas under the Environment Protection Act that came up in 1986, the maximum sentence that could be given is 10 years. So that tells you how big the gap was with respect to the regulatory framework. Having said that, 1985 was really the wake-up moment because 84's scars were still fresh and thousands of people had died. And in 85, a gas leak happens at a plant that works with chemicals in the heart of Delhi. A cloud 10 kilometers long drifts and actually results in more than 300 people being hospitalized and some score people essentially being basically perishing because of the exposure to the fumes. And this was a chemical called oleum, which is basically the base chemical for sulfuric acid. This really jolted the entire system, and given the Bhopal experience and now the Delhi experience, the urgency to do something about environment protection became even stronger, as a result of which the Environment Protection Act came into place in India. And this was the year 1986 when it came up.
While lawmakers mulled over policy and clauses, Advocate Mahesh Chandra Mehta approached the Supreme Court with another matter critical to public health and fundamental right to life.
Given the fact that air pollution had become more than visible in Delhi, those were the days when you actually stepped out in a white shirt, and by the evening your shirt would literally be pitch black because of the high levels of soot that you would see in the air. So CPCB had been asked to have a look at what the levels of air pollution are, whether it is a problem, is it a dangerous problem for the citizens, and what can be done about it. Curiously enough, there was a report generated but never made public. Interestingly, there were efforts made to implement some of the initial preliminary steps that were suggested in the report, which included trying to voluntarily, crack down on soot or ash emitting vehicles or dirty smoke emitting vehicles that Delhi administration, municipal corporation of the time, which was basically the territorial council, and the Delhi government, the Home Ministry and Delhi Police coming together and doing something about it. Funnily though, that report somehow wanted to come out because of the contents of the report, and maybe it was to the fortune of the people of Delhi that Mr. Mahesh Chandra Mehta managed to get hold of that report through some means that he never clearly ever defined. But it was a very alarming state of affairs, as the report pointed out, in Delhi. And globally, there was a great level of recognition already arising that air pollution is deadly to human health. So, given that context, there was no reason for somebody as active as Mr. Mehta to come and intervene with the court case And that is what basically triggered the very famous MC Mehta versus Union of India case with respect to the air pollution in Delhi that has sort of been going on since that time. Right?
The case reached a major milestone with the Supreme Court ordering the formation of Justice Saikia Commission to present concrete steps to tackle the issue of vehicular pollution. The committee recommended the use of CNG as an alternative fuel for vehicles. A couple of years later, the Ministry of Environment and Forest, in its report, estimated that about 3,000 metric tons of air pollutants were emitted in Delhi every day, with a major contribution of 67% from vehicular pollution. In a matter of 8 years, the concentration of carbon monoxide from vehicular emissions showed an increase of 92%, forcing the Supreme Court to pass stringent orders, which most notably mandated the conversion of entire Delhi fleet of diesel-powered buses to compressed natural gas by March 31st, 2001. Owing to that, the level of respirable suspended particulate matter was significantly lowered. It dropped from a peak of 409 microgram per meter cube in 1995 to 191 microgram per meter cube in 2000 and then further to 161 microgram per meter cube in 2007. The period of reform coincided with the phase of economic revolution, which scaled up the consumerist behavior of an average citizen several-fold, most evidently seen in the case of growing private vehicle ownership.
The lack of adequate public transport and its inability to catch up with the booming population of Delhi NCR was a big factor in the way in which vehicles got essentially absorbed into the system at a pace that was unprecedented. Even today, by the way, Delhi as a city has more registered vehicles than Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata added together. So you can imagine the scale at which the number of vehicles are. And by the way, as per government official records, there are 30 lakh vehicles or 3 million vehicles that are more than 20 years old even today in Delhi, that are still operational in Delhi, that have a Delhi registration plate. We don't know what's the status for most of these, nearly all of these vehicles, I'll put it this way.
Post 1990, the registered motor vehicles in Delhi kept on doubling every decade, leading to the national capital being one of the most congestion-prone cities in the world.
Because despite increasing all the road network, constructing many flyovers, first flyover was made at the time of first Asian Games, and now you have almost every major junction being converted to flyovers, and we are still talking about congestion. So congestion problem we haven't got rid of. We have made a lot of roads and increased capacity for cars, and as number of cars have increased, the benefits which came from converting from diesel to CNG buses very soon eroded. So we do, in between we had a lot of diesel cars also. Now there is a ban on diesel cars, but overall the cars are increasing. So all the negative externalities that comes with personal vehicles, increase in personal vehicles, we see that. High number of motorized two-wheelers, cars, congesting these are the two type of vehicles which really congest roads. They occupy maximum space. However, buses are seen as something, a vehicle that is creating congestion.
To solve the issue, researchers from leading educational institutes such as IIT Delhi proposed the model of bus rapid transit, also commonly known as metro on road model.
Curitiba had experimented with metro on road. They had called it metro on road because Curitiba's concern was that that was a rich city, many people had cars, but city space is always restricted. So they wanted to introduce a public transport system, and they also thought that they should do metro. And then they realized that they cannot afford metro because it's too expensive. Even if they take loan, they will have to repay the loan. So therefore, the mayor at that time, who was an architect, and he decided that why don't we imitate metro on road. So just like metro on rail has complete exclusive right of way, and that makes it very efficient with special stops design. So he tried to imitate that on the road. Give exclusive lanes to buses, and just like in metro system, make the bus stop in such a way that people already buy a ticket before boarding the bus, and then there is level boarding. So when you are getting inside the bus, there is no level difference. This was the idea formulated by Curitiba mayor, and this actually caught many planners' imagination in Latin American cities.
Here's also a thing about the philosophy behind how public transport should really work. The mayor of Bogota, a very famous mayor of Bogota, had once said, "My country cannot be seen as a developed country if everybody is running by car. I would see my country as a developed country when the rich people use public transport." And that is a philosophical position to take when it comes to something like the BRT. But in Delhi NCR, whether we like it or not, there is a strong elitist mindset when it comes to the usage of public transport. You will never see, well-to-do people, or very few of them rather, using buses. Metros are still probably acceptable, but buses definitely are not acceptable to that category. But the fact remains that they are the ones who somehow or the other manage to influence electoral outcomes or policy decision making the most, more than the electoral outcomes, because they have the significant advocacy power, unlike some of the most marginalized people in Delhi.
The reaction to the implementation of the model in Delhi exhibited that elitist mindset. Within days of its execution, it was bombarded by a flurry of criticism, not so from commuters, but from the media outlets.
Starts that why this is such a bad idea. And Times of India actually publishes, you can easily find that picture. They publish that the car lanes, which are still, we have still 2 lanes for cars, and at junction 3 lanes for cars, are all full, and they show that buses are running freely, and the caption of the of that picture says, "Commuters are stuck in traffic jam where buses run freely." So as though people who are inside the bus are not commuters, only car people matter. So this whole debate is tilted towards that.
Now, here's the fun part. A lot of the media folks at that time were people who themselves used their own personal vehicles like cars and motorcycles. None of them would travel in a bus necessarily, because it was not fashionable enough to be doing that. Also, the localities through which the BRT was basically plying, some of them were some of the poshest localities of Delhi. So there was also this perception created that this would negatively impact the property value of these areas. And given the fact that people in these areas are not necessarily single car owners, even they are multi car owners, it was bound to happen that the backlash would take place. Harping on that sentiment, the current ruling dispensation of Delhi also promised that we will scrap the BRT because it is such a badly designed, badly operated project. Of course, design elements can be questioned, but the fact remains that it was an attack on the basic philosophy of making more people commute by public transport and making it easier to commute by public transport vis-a-vis personal vehicles. Right. After all, that is also what the Delhi Metro does, isn't it? But so why was there this discrimination between a train operated system versus a bus operated system? Is the fundamental question that people trying to skirt.
While the attempt at reforming the Delhi transport scenario was brought to an abrupt end by the state government, the administration found itself caught in a major crisis. In the year 2014, the World Health Organization declared Delhi to have the worst air quality across the globe. The conclusion was obtained after a PM 2.5 level comparison of more than 1600 cities. PM 2.5 is a toxic pollutant that can penetrate deep into the lungs and further into the bloodstream, causing cardiovascular and respiratory effects, as well as potentially impacting the organ. Particulate matter is predominantly produced by the combustion of fossil fuels in various sectors such as transportation, energy, household, industry, and agriculture. The following year, IIT Kanpur conducted a source apportionment study on Delhi air crisis and submitted its report to the Delhi government.
2012 was the first time, to my memory, Delhi experienced a severe smog kind of situation. And that time I remember that some of the few monitors what Delhi had that time showed particulate matter exceeding 1000 microgram per meter cube. And followed that, I believe this study was commissioned. An idea was mainly to understand what are the sources that contribute to particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10, which you generally breathe in the ambient air. And when we say the source contribution, that is called source apportionment, is basically you try to get the relative contribution of various sources. In this case, the prominent ones being the vehicular emissions, industrial emissions, road dust, any kind of burning, and to certain extent secondary as well as the regional or long range transport.
However, since the research mainly focused on the sources, the mechanistic understanding of pollution was somewhat lacking. Therefore, this year IIT Kanpur came out with another study which spoke about the major issue of biomass burning.
This paper is actually an outcome of the research we conducted at very large scale in Delhi in 2019, and in that we sampled particulate matter at a couple of locations, right from upwind to the center of Delhi and downwind also in Faridabad. And mainly we had a whole suite of information collected about PM 2.5 and its very detailed chemistry, and as well as its chemistry about its precursor gases at IIT Delhi. That was the sampling location, and we found that there was a very sharp rise in particulate matter concentration from 6 p.m. and by the early morning hours, this basically the PM 2.5 would rise from 60-70 microgram to 250 to 400 microgram per meter cube. And we looked into that what are the factors which are driving this, and we found that what was the totally novel thing, that why this paper was published in Nature Geoscience, is the fact that because of various kind of burning or incomplete inefficient combustions, that co-emitted gases, the particulate matter comes out, which are very, very fine, we call it nanoparticles, having sizes less than 100 nanometer, and they grow very fast because of the condensation of these co-emitted gases, organic vapors, and which basically makes these particles grow beyond 100 nanometer, and after that a different kind of growth mechanism takes place, and the particles just grow and become of the size of 1 micron, and thereby contributing to the PM 2.5 in very high amount, and which actually contributes to the haze formation.
Adding to the already deteriorated air condition, the smoke emitted from stubble burning brings the capital to a halt every winter. The media cacophony around it heightens at the same time as political parties across the states engage in political slugfest and endless blame game. However, the issue emanates from a greater dilemma emerging out of geographical limitations.
Punjab is focusing on trying to arrest the decline of the groundwater table. And on a pilot basis, it first experiments a delay of the sowing cycle for paddy. And it actually results in significant benefits in that pilot, which is why it gets rolled out across the state. And there are varieties which are short grown in terms of its longevity cycles. But what it resulted in was that, coupled with the delay, the cycle for harvesting, clearing the land, and then starting the next cycle effectively got reduced from 2 months to just 15 days.
Caught in the web of ecological constraints and lucrative financial output, farmers continue with the callous practice of stubble burning. At the same time, judicial action of imposing fines on poor farmers hasn't aided in betterment of the situation. Rather, it aggravated resentment amongst them.
So one of the sad outcomes of the farm protest that took place was that a law that was introduced via an ordinance on stubble burning, had basically making it a punishable offence, got withdrawn. as a conciliatory measure for for agitating farmers. But of course, we all know what eventually happened. So that was it. When it comes to taking action on controlling stubble burning, states like Haryana and Uttar Pradesh, because Western Uttar Pradesh was also one of the contributors, has definitely seen significant improvement. Haryana has had one window where it had near zero incidents taking place, but in Punjab it continues to remain a problem. While the total number of incidents have certainly come down, the magnitude or the delta to which that reduction has happened is still like way below optimal.
While stubble burning has caught the eye of media recently, there used to be and still is an issue that it loves to blow out of proportion, and that is of firecrackers burned on the occasion of Deepavali. Even when firecracker was neither a top pollutant nor it had any impact beyond 3 days.
We have looked into that, and that was work done jointly with IIT Delhi. And Diwali's contribution starts from a day before of the day where Diwali happens, on the day of Diwali, and a day followed by the day of Diwali. So primarily, you see, it contributes transiently. The fact of the matter is that many times you already have a very kind of a extreme episode happening over Delhi, and in that case, if you add another factor, then it only force multiplies in a way and then creates a larger problem. But essentially, Diwali has a contribution not more than to Delhi's air quality deterioration for not more than 1.5 to 3 days.
Therefore, one wonders, why was there such a noise around it?
Firecrackers and the agitation against it is an old story. If you look at it carefully and if you remember your own school days, at every Diwali you would be made to take an oath that you would not burn firecrackers, though I believe most students also burned that oath in spirit and in smoke. But if you remember those times, interestingly, the original pitch was that firecrackers was an industry that used child labor. It was never about air pollution. That makes you wonder, what was the real motive behind coming up with these kind of questions and environmental cases? Dr. S.N. Tripathi, Professor S.N. Tripathi, who I believe you have also interviewed, has very categorically shown in a recent journal paper that the impact of firecrackers is barely for 1.5 days in a year. So what was achieved except for optics? And that is also another problem that I have with the way the entire air pollution case gets fought or labeled or even discussed in public. It's mostly optics going on more than substance being implemented. Firecrackers is a classic example of that. India was one of the leading manufacturers of firecrackers and was also leading exporter of firecrackers, by the way. But what we have seen is that the firecracker industry has been decimated over the last decade and a half with these kind of weird regulations, because the largest market of firecrackers was the Gangetic Plain and particularly Delhi NCR. Now, when you kill the biggest market, you're killing the industry.
The ban gave rise to futile debates, which had no value as there was no improvement in air quality. Apart from that, it was deceptive on part of authorities that they shifted attention to a non-issue rather than addressing the primary factors.
The Supreme Court itself acknowledged that probably this is just an optic measure and we are doing it because people should realize, if it was such an important thing for people to realize, why has it not been ever mandated that you cannot use your cars for 2 specified days in a year? Is something I would counter it with. Similarly, you have, by banning firecrackers, encroached on the idea of traditional practice as well to an extent. Because firecrackers or the usage of them at one level also had religious significance for a large section of the communities that live in Delhi NCR. And I just don't mean Hindu community. Sikhs also have used firecrackers. Jains have used firecrackers. Buddhists have used firecrackers for various purposes. Now it cannot. Now just look at the optics. Since you're so concerned about the optics, you can burst firecrackers on Christmas and New Year, but you can't burst firecrackers on Diwali. What kind of optics does that generate for the Supreme Court is something that I believe the Supreme Court and its august judges should think about.
Amidst all, there exists a silver lining today. and that is there is a global consensus regarding sustainable development being the way forward.
Development is the need of hour, but we need to seek sustainable development, where we need to provide the population clean air, clean water, and the effort should go in that direction. Now that requires that we should have adequate monitoring, right? So we need to adopt other ways of monitoring air quality. For example, today we are monitoring using imported, these monitors which are expensive. And there is a lot of effort going on, including in my laboratory, where we are trying to deploy these sensors-based monitoring stations across the two states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, connecting each and every block. Now, if you have these kind of more economically sustainable way of monitoring air quality happens, you get data, and that data would help us to understand that what is the current level of air quality, how well the interventions are working. That's one part of it. The second part of that, we need to also develop more human resources. As of now, there is a huge gap between the required number of the professionals we need in air quality management and the current number which we are producing in this country. And only when we can fill the gap, and this gap is very large, it runs into few thousands. So only when we can develop more human resources in, I said, broad area of air quality management. That means monitoring, developing technology, understanding science, and then doing the management. Then only they can go and then address this problem as part of different governments, be it local or state or central or within industries or with regulators. So we need to invest into the local homegrown monitoring technologies, also into mitigation measures, mitigation technologies we need to develop within the country. We need to promote that, and then you can have a better handle of this problem, which is required because the air quality is a problem which can be managed. That it's not a problem which can be solved. That is why this term comes air quality management. So you need to have a very robust kind of air quality management system here at all levels.
From the mid 1980s to the early 2020s, in the past 4 decades, the city's air quality has seen drastic ups and downs. As we march towards becoming a developed nation, the need to provide every individual with a decent quality of living should be our utmost priority. Therefore, the ability to inhale healthy air has to be a basic necessity and not a luxury that you can only have in rooms packed with air purifiers. On that note, we bid adieu with a hope that the great city will overcome the struggle and breathe again.